Instagram, pending live on Facebook. And we are good, I hope, on two formats. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. Good morning, Facebook viewers. Good morning, Instagram viewers. And thank you for downloading and streaming if you are picking us up on your way to or from work or wherever you have us in your earbuds. Thanks for downloading the Institute of Clinical Excellence PT on Ice Daily Show. It is Friday. I am Mitch. This is Fitness Athlete Friday, and I'm glad to be here. We've had a rockin' morning at the gym at CrossFit Fenton. 3 full mornings, and I got another class ready to go in 15 minutes. So we got to keep this one on schedule this morning. What are we talking about? Let's cut to the chase. Some anti-extension exercises for the low back for your athletes who are always kicking into extension when they do their deadlifts, squats, rowing, picking up any bars off the floor, what have you, that can really start to bleed out into some extension intolerant low back pain, bleeding down like the SI joint, maybe radiating into the glute. I got a patient case like that right now in my caseload, and we've been moving through a handful of exercises with some pretty good success. So I figured it was timely to share some of those movements and exercises with you guys. So this is your athlete. We typically have a background, maybe dance, cheerleading, gymnastics, a lot of extension mobility through the low back. Typically they find stability in that overextended position quite often. And so when they go to pick up a bar off the ground, they kick into that position. When they are in a back squat position, they kick into that overextension. And once it gets hot and irritable, anytime they fire up into extension, it just immediately brings back on all their same symptoms. Many times with quite a bit of irritability, right? So what are the movements that we are selecting, Alan and I, because we actually both have somebody on our case with something similar. What are the movements that we like to go with and we're sharing and getting some good, getting some productive adaptation from? So I'm going to give you 5 of my favorites this morning. This is not an all-inclusive list. But it is 5 that we're using in the clinic on a day-to-day basis. The first one is the PVC hip hinge. You've heard us talk about it a lot. There is nothing better, in my opinion, than teaching an athlete what a neutral spine position looks like and how to move about their pelvis without moving their spine into and out of extension all the time. So give them that PVC rod, put it along the length of their spine. They have one hand holding it on the back of the head, the other hand holding it at the sacrum, right? And so what they're learning then is how to hinge and how to squat without excessive movement around the spine. Many times they don't know how to initiate those movements without overextending, or maybe some of your other athletes on the other end of the continuum don't know how to initiate without flexing, right? So that movement pattern on both ends of the scale, or that movement rather, the PVC hip hinge on both ends of the scale is really, really good for telling the athlete, hey, this is neutral. How can we move around the hips and the pelvis without doing that? I like to do a lot of hip hinge specifically, and then immediately drop that and go right into some kettlebell deadlifts, right? So they just grease that groove of that hip hinge and then put a kettlebell and a weight in their hand and say, hey, can you do that same thing? Just don't pull with your back, right? As soon as I give them a weight, their tendency is going to want to be to use their back and pull into extension. Can you minimize that motion at the spine and instead use your hips and your hamstrings to make that movement occur, right? That's what we're trying to get after, and that's why that PVC is that really nice core that translates over well to the deadlift, in the squat if you wanted to do that, right? So that one is like day one anti-extension stuff, just learning how to keep the spine neutral and move around the pelvis, right? The next one that I really like, and this isn't, again, not in any specific order and doesn't necessarily correlate to the PVC hip hinge, but I like the banded plank, right? A band resisted plank hold. So your classic front plank on your elbows or on your hands, doesn't matter. But the athlete's doing this inside of the squat pose. And we're taking the J-cups and we're putting them on their lowest possible setting, and we're putting a band across them. So the athlete is literally crawling underneath a band. The band is across their hips. And so when they lift up and hold the plank, they're against banded downward pressure. That downward pressure should be right at the area that they tend to overextend from, which really reinforces crunching the midline, flexing the stomach, keeping the ribs down, and resisting that posture and that position against the band, right? We like to use a Tabata sequence on this, which is a 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. I will sometimes have athletes start with a half Tabata, where they start with just 4 rounds of that same time domain sequence, and then move into the full Tabata, which is 8 rounds, right? 8 rounds of 20 seconds on, 10 seconds rest. Again, the band is right over the area they tend to hyperextend at. we put that there and we have them hold that front plank against that. So try that one out. That's a Tabata banded plank. It can be on elbows, it can be on your hands. The J cups are at their lowest setting. The band is right across the area they hyperextend, L5, L4 region, right? So your banded plank's a really, really nice one that we use a bunch. Next is the Jefferson curl. And I know what some of you were thinking, anti-extension. Yeah, this isn't really anti-extension, but this is a nice movement that athletes who have this this same symptom production issue, right, with this extension pain, when we get them moving into flexion with that little kettlebell, can really, really start to feel good, feel like alleviating to their symptoms and allow their back to kind of stretch out in a pain-free manner. So the Jefferson curl, for those that are wondering, we usually keep that ultra light to start, and my rep scheme is anywhere between 5 to 10 reps, right? 5 to 10 reps. We have athletes stand up on a nice 6-inch or a 12-inch stool, allowing their chin to rotate first, flexing the thoracic spine, and rolling down to their lumbar spine. Pausing for one breath at the bottom of that Jefferson curl, and then reversing that pattern and bringing themselves back up to upright. Again, pulls them into a little bit more flexion, is not really an anti-extension exercise, but is something that we use with that same caliber of athlete. So put that in your arsenal if you haven't been trying that one yet. Load that one up. Okay, last two are banded exercises that we've been using a lot. They're kind of like motor control exercises, but again, teach the athlete to don't extend, stay tight in the midline. That's the tall kneeling press and then the banded Y overhead press. Okay, so let's talk about those. The tall kneeling press. The athlete's in tall kneeling, both knees on the ground, hips are fully extended, right? They're taking bands and pressing them overhead where the band tension is going behind them, right? So if I've got, so for us, for example, we got the crossover symmetry system. That's attached that way behind me. I'm tall kneeling facing away from it, and then I'm pressing and reaching overhead and back down again. The goal then is that the band is going to want to pull me into extension, and I have to fight the entire time I'm pressing to keep the ribs down and maintain neutral spine position. Okay, if that's really hard for the athlete, reduce them to a half kneeling position instead of tall kneeling so that they can kind of flex that hip underneath them a little bit, squeeze their butt, and make sure that they're holding neutral. Then once they get half kneeling figured out, then you can take them to tall kneeling. Yeah, they will be great for yourself if you have that problem, right? So try a tall kneeling overhead press where the band's pulling behind you. If you don't have a crossover symmetry system, any type of banded or cable machine will work just fine. Have those bands drawing tension behind you and try to press overhead. Now the banded Y overhead is a little bit different because now we're laying on our back, and we'll have athletes flex their hips and knees up to 90-90, and you can put them up on a box if you want, put their feet up on a box, because now it's a biofeedback mechanism, right? So now I can feel the ground flat underneath my spine, and I'm trying to pull those bands down and overhead, right? I'm pulling them back to the floor. And typically athletes will try to overextend when they pull down to the floor. And when they do, you'll be able to slide your hand underneath their back, between their back and the floor. That's their negative cue that, hey, if I can get through here, if you've arched and overextended, then I can slide my hand under your back. Then that's the position that we're trying to avoid. That's the position that we're trying to train out, right? So cue them to pull their ribs down. Maybe just say, hey, take a hard exhale for me. Breathe out, right? And now maintain that tension in your rib cage, pushing your back flat into the floor, and now try to pull up and overhead, right? Who might we use this exercise with? Well, this might be your tight shoulder athlete who overextends their low back to make up for their inability to press overhead fully. Right? So this is now two birds, one stone, right? Now we're teaching the ability of the low back to stay compact and tight to the floor, and teaching the shoulder to pull with the rhomboids and the lower traps. How do we pull the arm back and overhead, and to get into a better overhead position when we're doing presses, split jerks, push jerks, all the overhead movements that we do at CrossFit, right? So I like that drill a lot for that athlete who's extending because of a shoulder mobility issue, all the while you're trying to train that out. So again, these are your athletes who are overextending a bunch. Don't neglect rowing technique either, right? Because a lot of times rowing technique is going to emphasize that overextension of the back and pulling, overextended pulling. And so in the same way that you can do the PVC hip hinge drill to train out that overextension pattern, you can do the PVC cueing on the rower so that they don't overextend. And instead you just emphasize a bunch of leg drive. Keep your belly tight and push with your legs. Keep your belly tight and push with your legs. While an athlete is still learning new rowing technique, it's a good idea to dose some shorter rowing intervals. Sitting them on the rower and say, okay, have at it, go row a 5K, is only going to watch their technique degrade very fast in the first 500 to 1,000 meters. And then they're going to spend the next 4,000 meters rowing with the same old crappy technique again, right? So start them off with some totally achievable intervals. Maybe it's 30 seconds on, 10, 20, 30 seconds off, whatever it is. Short domains, short distances, so that they can go good technique for a couple good strokes and then they rest. Good technique for a few more strokes and then rest. As they start to demonstrate solid technique with the rowing and not overextending, then you can start to challenge it with longer domains, longer pieces on the rower, and see what they do when they're breathing hard. But set them up for success by dosing that stuff out shorter with some smaller intervals. Okay, because I got to stay prompt on my schedule, I have exactly 2.5 minutes until I have to coach my next CrossFit class, and we got to talk about cleans for these folks. So before I run, I want to make sure you know that my first live course since all the fiasco of COVID back in March will be September down in Nashville. So if you are interested in joining us, look us up. The course is listed on the course website, ice.physio or ptionice.com. You can join me and Alexis Morgan at CrossFit Hendersonville. They taught me how to say that last time I was there. Hendersonville. CrossFit Hendersonville. So excited about that one. That's still on the book. So if you want to join us for a live course down just outside of Nashville, look it up, ptionice.com, and you can join us there. I wanted to make sure you knew about that. Okay, I'm seriously out of time. Thank you guys for joining me this morning. I hope you all have a great weekend, enjoying the rest of these summer weekends that we have while they're still here. Stay safe in the clinic and out and about, and we will see you guys next week on the show. Have a good one. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptionice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptionice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.